The laughter came first, short, sharp, and just a little too eager. "Your orders say observe." "Only ma'am." Sergeant Paul Harker said, his voice carrying across the firing line, "which means you stay behind the yellow line and let the men do the real work." His words dripped with condescension, each syllable sharpened into a blade meant to cut. The recruits, young restless Marines, desperate for approval, chuckled on cue. Their laughter wasn't bold, it was nervous, a reflex to align themselves with authority. Harker didn't laugh with them, he didn't have to. Their reaction was his validation. Standing quietly at the edge of the range, Chief Warrant Officer Dana Keaton gave no sign she'd even heard him. Her fatigues were clean but unremarkable, her hair pulled back in a functional knot, her stance unassuming. To the recruits, she was invisible, an officer here to watch, maybe to shuffle paperwork. Later, certainly not to touch a rifle. To Harker, she was a convenient target, an opportunity to remind the platoon who held the authority. But across the dusty expanse, someone else was watching. From the shade of the observation tower, Colonel Mason studied Keaton through narrowed eyes. What he saw wasn't weakness, and it wasn't ignorance. It was the subtle way her weight shifted onto the balls of her feet, the efficiency in the way she turned her head to follow the wind flags, the absolute stillness in her posture. These were not the habits of a casual observer. These were the unconscious reflexes of someone who had lived her life on a firing line. Moments like this rarely announce themselves. They creep in quietly, disguised as routine. A sergeant trying to impress his men. A group of recruits laughing because they don't know any better. An officer standing silent, bearing the insult without reaction. But in truth, these moments are pressure points, small humiliations that swell into turning points. Harker believed he had put her in her place. The recruits believed they had just watched their instructor score another victory. The reality was different. Dana Keaton hadn't flinched because there was nothing to flinch from. Every measured gesture, her eyes scanning the targets, shimmering in heat, miraged the calm rhythm of her breathing. The way she brushed a bit of dust from her sleeve wasn't weakness. It was control. She was not there to prove anything with words. She was there to let the work speak for her. Conflict doesn't always begin with a shout. Sometimes it begins with a crooked smile, an assumption made too quickly, a ripple of laughter that masks uncertainty. The recruits thought they had witnessed a joke. What they were really seeing was the opening move of a confrontation far greater than they could imagine. And when the range demanded its answer, it would not be Harker's voice the desert listened to. It would be Keaton's silence. The range went quiet after Harker's remark, but the silence did not last. Colonel Mason raised his hand and the final exercise was announced. The recruits straightened, instantly their shoulders stiffening, as if the weight of the day suddenly grew heavier. This was no ordinary test. It was the Whiskey Tango scenario, a simulated hostage rescue at extreme distance, a shot so difficult it was whispered about long after men graduated from the course. The target was a steel silhouette set at over 1,200 meters, the hostage plate bolted tight against its chest. The shot had to land in the kill zone without touching the hostage. That alone was demanding, but today the canyon wind had turned traitor. Gusts tore through the range in unpredictable swirls, shifting direction without warning, pushing mirages across the desert floor like phantom rivers. It was the kind of environment that humbles even the best marksmen. One by one, the recruits stepped forward. Their rifles gleamed, their faces taut with nerves, their pride straining under the weight of expectation. Each man shouldered his weapon as if willing it to merge with his own body. But willpower alone does not bend the wind. The first shot cracked through the air, followed by a metallic clang as the round struck the hostage plate. A groan rippled across the line. The second recruit fared no better. His round missed the entire frame. By the fourth attempt, the air on the range had soured. Frustration settled in thick and suffocating. Sergeant Paul Harker's voice cut through the tension like a whip. "Are you blind, Marine? You watching the mirage at all, or just guessing?" His words landed harder than the shots themselves, and each failure only seemed to feed his anger. He prowled behind the shooter's clipboard in hand, his critiques turning into accusations. The recruits' shoulders hunched lower with every bellow, their confidence stripped away in real time. Still they tried, and still they failed. Each shot strayed either wide of the target or straight into the hostage plate. The wind, invisible but merciless, mocked them all. The platoon's best shooter was saved for last, the one man Harker claimed could salvage their pride. He took his place behind the M210 rifle. his movements careful, his lips pressed together in a silent prayer. For a moment, hope stirred. He checked his dope chart 3 times, waited for the wind to die, then drew in a breath and broke the shot. The crack rang out across the canyon. A heartbeat later came the sound everyone dreaded, a sharp, hollow clang. Another hit on the hostage plate. The last chance was gone. Harker exploded. His face flushed crimson, his fists slammed against the clipboard, and his voice thundered over the range. Unbelievable, a complete washout. Not a single one of you can make that shot. His words, soaked in fury, echoed across the canyon walls, settling over the recruits like a shroud of shame. The men stood, frozen eyes cast downward, their pride shattered. The legendary test had beaten them, and their sergeant's scorn finished the job. Morale collapsed into silence. Through it all, Chief Warrant Officer Dana Keaton remained a figure of stillness at the edge of the line. Her expression unchanged. Her breathing, even her eyes fixed not on Harker or the recruits, but on the distant target shimmering in the distorted air. Where others saw failure, she saw information. Each missed round told a story about wind distance and judgment. To her, the chaos was not noise, it was data. And as the platoon sank beneath the weight of defeat, her silence stood apart, heavier than Harker's rage, sharper than any insult. The air hung heavy after Harker's outburst. His words still echoed across the canyon, carried by the same fickle wind that had defeated every man on the line. The recruits stood in silence, their pride ground down to dust. Not a single shooter had cleared the test. The great Whiskey Tango scenario had broken them, and their sergeant's rage had crushed whatever was left. It was in that hollow moment when defeat seemed final that a new sound cut through the stillness. A sharp click followed by the soft clap of dust brushed from palms. Every head turned. Chief Warrant Officer Dana Keaton, the quiet observer who had endured Harker's scorn without a word, stepped forward. She crossed the yellow line with measured steps, her boots leaving faint prints on the powdery ground. There was no announcement, no request for permission. She simply moved calm and unhurried toward the abandoned firing position. A low murmur rippled through the recruits. Harker's face twisted, his authority stung. "What do you think you're doing, ma'am?" He growled, his voice low and dangerous. But Keaton didn't respond. Her silence was sharper than any retort. She knelt beside the rifle left by the last shooter, her hands moving with an ease that made the weapon look less like a tool and more like an old companion. She did not check charts or fuss over meters. She didn't need to. Her fingers flowed across the rifle in a seamless rhythm born of years, decades of practice. She cleared the chamber, ejected the spent casing, and seated a fresh round with a crisp, metallic snap. The actions were so smooth, so natural, that even the recruits who had doubted her felt something shift in their chests. The wind tore through the canyon again, rattling flags and stinging eyes with sand. To them, it was chaos. To her, it was language. Keaton closed her eyes for a moment, tilting her face into the gusts, as if she were listening. The recruits saw nothing but air. She felt the story of its movement, the shift of heat, miraged the pressure on her skin, the current threading through the canyon's throat. Colonel Mason's voice broke the tension. "Stand down, Sergeant," he barked at Harker, whose anger had begun to boil over. The order froze him in place. All eyes returned to Keaton as she settled behind the stock, her body melting into the earth, her breathing steady and slow. Inhale, exhale, pause. For those who have lived behind a rifle, you know the moment. That thin wire of time stretched taut when everything narrows to a single point. The world shrinks to the weight of a trigger under your finger. The crack of the shot was different from all the others that day, not frantic, not forced. It was a sound of certainty, a note struck clean. Silence followed, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Every recruit squinted toward the distant target hearts caught in their throats. Then it came, the faint, unmistakable ping of steel. The spotter confirmed what none dared believe. The hostage plate stood untouched. The round had drilled clean into the kill zone of the hostage-taker silhouette. A perfect shot. A shot that no one else on that range had been able to make. The silence that followed was thunderous. Harker's jaw slackened. The recruits stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. And Dana Keaton, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, cycled, the bolt cleared the rifle, and laid it gently back on its rest. She rose without triumph, brushed the dust from her knees, and stepped away. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was dominance, proven beyond argument. The ping of steel still lingered in the recruit's ears when Colonel Mason left the command tower. His boots crunched over gravel, each step deliberate. His eyes locked on Chief Warrant Officer Dana Keaton. She had already cleared the rifle, standing quietly with her hands folded behind her back, her face unreadable. To the recruits, she looked like an ordinary officer who had just done something extraordinary. To Mason, she looked like someone he had met before, though never face to face. As he drew closer, a memory surfaced. Years earlier, in a closed briefing room at Fort Bragg, Mason had been handed a classified dossier about a unit so secret it barely existed on paper. There had been a code name, a list of impossible operations, and one name that appeared again and again in after-action reports. The name carried a reputation. Even generals respected Dana Keaton. Mason stopped directly in front of her. He removed his cap, a gesture that silenced even the restless wind. His gaze never wavered from her calm expression. Sergeant Harker Mason said, without turning his head, his voice sharp as a knife, "Bring me the secure tablet. Now." Harker hesitated, his face pale, but obeyed. His hands shook as he unlocked the portal and searched the file Mason demanded. A moment later, the screen glowed with a record that drained the last trace of arrogance from his body. His jaw went slack, his breath caught. He looked at Keaton, then back at the tablet, as if trying to reconcile legend with the flesh and blood woman standing a few feet away. Mason took the device and read aloud, his tone grave and deliberate. Chief Warrant Officer Dana Keaton, Primary Specialty Special Operations Target Interdiction. Combat deployments, 14, all classified. Advanced skill qualifications, high-angle marksmanship. SEER, Master Instructor Counter-Sniper Doctrine Author. He paused, letting each phrase settle over the recruits like a weight they could barely carry. He continued. Awards include Silver Star 3 Bronze Stars with Valor Purple Heart. At the top of this file, Mason's voice tightened with respect, a commendation from a 4-star general. Keaton is not just a sniper. She is the standard by which all others are measured. She is the final answer to the hardest questions. The range fell utterly silent. Not even the wind dared intrude. The recruits who had laughed hours earlier now stood rigid, eyes wide, struggling to comprehend that the quiet observer they had dismissed was a living legend. Mason lowered the tablet and turned toward Harker. "You are a trainer of men," he said coldly. "Assumption is a luxury you cannot afford. Ignorance is a luxury this army will not tolerate." The words landed like hammer blows, stripping the last defense from the sergeant who had mocked Keaton only hours earlier. Then Mason did something none of the recruits expected. He straightened his frame, snapped to attention, and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. The gesture was not for rank. It was for reputation, for mastery, for the silent professional who had just proven beyond all doubt that competence requires no announcement. Chief Keaton, Mason said quietly, his voice now carrying reverence instead of command, "Your reputation precedes you. It is an honor." She returned the salute with calm precision, her face unchanged. She offered no words, no smile. Her silence, as always, spoke louder than anything else could. The salute from Colonel Mason marked the turning point, but the real change came afterward. By sundown, every man on base had heard about Chief Warrant Officer Dana Keaton and the impossible shot she had made without fanfare. They called it the observer's shot, a legend born in the silence. After steel rang across the canyon. The next morning, Sergeant Paul Harker arrived at the range before dawn. Gone was the swagger, gone was the clipped arrogance in his stride. He carried no clipboard. Instead, he carried a broom. He swept the brass quietly along the firing line, his movements slow, deliberate, almost penitent. Later that week, he approached Keaton. No audience, no performance. Just a man stripped down to truth. "Chief," he said, eyes lowered. "I was arrogant. I was wrong. Will you teach me?" Keaton gave only a simple nod, but that nod meant everything. What followed was not lessons in glory, but lessons in patience, reading the wind, trusting fundamentals, finding calm where others found panic. The recruits who once laughed at her silence began treating the chalk line she'd crossed as something sacred. They started calling it the Keaton Line, a reminder that talk means little, but proof endures. Months later, the culture of that range was unrecognizable. The bluster and bravado that once filled the air had been replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. Scores improved, Yes, but more importantly, respect changed its shape. It was no longer awarded to the loudest voice. It was earned in the silence of demonstrated skill. For those of us who've worn the uniform, the lesson is timeless. Real authority doesn't shout. It proves. And legacy isn't what you say, it's what you leave behind. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about the quiet professionals you've known. And if you want more stories where humility triumphs over arrogance, subscribe and stay with us. These are lessons worth passing on.